At the foot of the mountains, the tower stood like a pale finger thrust into an uncommonly blue Dornish sky. The wind that came down off the red dunes brought dust and the faint smell of thyme. Inside, the world stank of blood and lavender oil. Eddard Stark had washed it from his hands already, from beneath his nails and the creases of his knuckles. It clung to him all the same, sour with the copper of other men and the sweetness of the bed where his sister had died. He could feel it even now, as he sat on the broad sill of a narrow window and stared west to where the sun hung like a coin. He had buried Lyanna an hour past. Under stones he carried himself to a place where a trickle of water sang out of rock. He had laid blue winter roses on her, though their petals had gone to paper in this southern heat. "Promise me, Ned," she had whispered, fingers bruised with gripping. He had promised. Of all the words in the world, that one was iron. Behind him, Howland Reed moved softly, the reed fisher's stride that made no sound. He had the last of the Dornish light upon his hair and face. The Crannogman's eyes belonged to Marsh and Moon, but they were red now. "The men are at the well," he said. "They have finished with Ser Went. They will begin at dawn with Ser Gerald."
Ned nodded.
Dane had been first. Even in death, Ser Arthur seemed a thing of grace. Dawn had been laid against the wall, pale as winter milk. Ned would carry it to Starfall. That much he knew, though he could not yet think what words he would speak there. The living carried burdens, and the dead lay easy. Howland's gaze had fallen to the small oaken coffer on Ned's knee, to the dragon pressed into its dark red wax. Lyanna's ring had sprung the hidden latch. She had known the place in the bedside chest, under folded linen and the sprig of dried mint she liked to tuck in against moths. She had known because someone had told her, long ago in a room where the curtains were drawn, and because this tower had been built to hide as much as to watch. Ned had only to touch the coffer to feel the heat of all that was bound inside it. He broke the seal. Nothing leapt from the box, no spell, no serpent. Only paper sleeps until a man puts eyes upon it. He had never in his life feared paper, not among the stiff vellums in Winterfell solar, not in the long, busy letters Maester Luwin sent and received. Yet as he drew out a bundle of folded leaves tied with gold thread, his breath came shorter and the room seemed to narrow. The first letter smelled faintly of cedar. The hand was clear and strong, calm even in haste. "Lord Eddard Stark," it began, and Ned read it 3 times before he could believe that name written in that hand. "You do not know me, save as the adversary of your friend, and in that much the songs have done us both a discourtesy. I write to beg from you what the songs would never ask and what I have no right to demand. Yet the world makes a mock of rights." He read on. The letters were dated in the prince's hand, set down from the year before and this year as well, in the wake of the Trident, and before that, pages scattered from the ridge of Rookery Hill, from a camp beneath a lemon grove near Ironwood, from the shadow of the ridge that men called the Boneway. There were words about a woman who loved all that ran wild, who would climb and run and race any mare. Words about a war that had gone sour in every mouth. There were lines written in some hurry after an omen he thought he read in a fragment of Summerhall's chart accountings. And there were the strangest of them all, written in a more careful, formal style in which he spoke not just of love but of marriage, under the faith. Ned could scarce feel the stone beneath him. "I have wed Lyanna of Winterfell," wrote Rhaegar Targaryen in a steady black line that did not blench even at the syllables of her name. "I took vows before the 7, and she beside me. We swore before a holy man who had the right to witness vows and placed them before the Father's judgment. I put into his hand the proof that I am a man who keeps oaths or is damned by them. I know what men will say of me. I know what your friend will say. I have not undone any other vow lightly. If I am guilty, let the gods be my accusers and the stranger my doom. She is my wife. If you find this letter, it means I am not there to answer for those words, and so I beg you to keep the proof of them. Nothing I can say will soften what must be endured. I ask you only to read what follows. A marriage." Ned looked to Howland Reed. The Crannogman had come nearer without seeming to move at all. He watched the letters the way a hunter watched a rise in reeds that might be an eel or a log. "He calls her wife," Howland said softly. "He writes to you in peace. in the shadow of all that is not peace. There was a second ribbon-tied set. Witnesses, the first page proclaimed in an ordinary hand, and below it Ned found 3 marks he knew and 1 he did not. Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander and sworn brother of the Kingsguard. Oswell Went, sworn brother of the Kingsguard. Arthur Dane, Sword of the Morning and sworn brother of the Kingsguard. And beneath those, a cramped, careful signature with ink blotted twice. An itinerant septon in the service of House Ironwood, whose name was written in a manner suggesting he had taken it at ordination and meant to bear it without troubling anyone. His wax impressed with a 7-pointed star. There were other leaves, a line of the High Septon's cipher, where the faith-marked dispatches, copied in another hand. A brief reply in which a senior scribe in Old Town advised that the receipt of the Septon's record had been noted and bound. It was not proof to shut every mouth that would call Lyon a whore and Rhaegar thief, but it was heavy, heavier than paper had any right to be. Ned's fingers shook. He who had swung a sword and set men in their graves, whose hand did not tremble before lords or the cries of a dying boy, found he could not set down the page. He thought of Robert's laughter, like thunder, and of Robert's face when he had lain wounded and speaking of dragons and the joy of their deaths. He thought of the cold of the crypts beneath Winterfell, where a little brother had once held his hand, both of them listening to old kings in stone. He thought of the child sleeping in the room beyond, his sister's child, his sister's son. There was a third letter under the others, and Lyanna's ring lay above it, as if that were its lock. Ned lifted the ring and the page came free. It was brief, written with a deliberate hand after much thought. If this reaches you, Eddard Stark, then the choice I would have made is no longer mine to make. I have read too many books in rooms too quiet for an honest man, and I have carried too many songs in my head, but there is one truth I have not been able to set aside. There will come a long winter. In Summerhall they burned, chasing a promise. What they could not pull from the flame will come of its own, when ice remembers. If I fall, the thing we made must live and be hidden. If I live, I will put him in the sun, for he will need to look upon the light and name it. Either way, he will be both. Your sister said there is iron in you that will not bend for any king. Do not bend for me, bend only to keep him breathing. There was no name upon that page, as if any name put down there would be plucked up by some spider for some net. Ned read the words again and again. He did not know whether he hated the man who had written them or pitied him. He knew only that the world outside this tower would have its say. The proof of it, Howland murmured. If word of this leaves your hand, the boy is burned like those at Summerhall, whether he be prince or plowboy. Ned closed the coffer and bound the gold thread tight again. He looked toward the door that led to the room where Lyanna had bled and begged and at last gone quiet, her fingers slackening around his. He had never been strong enough to save her. He would be strong enough to save her son. We will not speak of this outside these stones, he said. I will take the letters and the witness and the ring, and they will be locked where no hand can reach. How? Asked Howland. Will you lock your face when you stand before your king? I will bring him a lie to look upon, Ned said, each word like a nail. And I will make that lie so heavy it will crush me long before it crushes the boy. They did not leave the tower until morning. At dawn they carried Dane to the patch of ground where the water sang. Ned took Dawn up in its scabbard. No man should go into the earth naked, not even a sword, and set it across Arthur's breast. He thought of a pale boy with laughing eyes who had once bested Brandon at swords with a reed, and later with steel, and wondered at the unkindness that set some men to be born to truth and others to stories. Howland spoke the gods' wood words while the spearwives of the Crannogmen hummed the low song their mothers had taught them. The other dead they laid beside him in honor. There had been no victory in the red spar of yard below, only an ending. They left 3 men to keep the tower until it had been stripped and sealed. Men had a way of coming to bones to make new lies from old. Ned wrapped the coffer in a rank sack beneath jerkin and mail, so that it lay between his ribs and his heart, and he rode out under sky already hard with heat. They turned their faces west for Starfall. Along the long broken road, the Dornish scrub gave out to stands of twisted oak. Then in time to the clean glare of white stone set above the river, Starfall shimmering as if half-built from water. The pale stone sword rose from its heart, a column and tower to match its name. Ned had only seen it once before. He remembered Ashera Dane's eyes in a hall lit with summer lanterns, colored silks and dancing. Brandon had whirled with her and laughed and laughed. Men had told stories afterward, as they did. Some stories ate the truth. The steward of Starfall met them in the outer yard, flanked by servants linen-robed and still. He had a long, narrow face gone yellow with grief, and the words he spoke were fine words, but too smooth to hold. "Lady Ashera receives you, my lord," he said, with a little flourish that might have been courtesy in any other year. "And she receives Dawn." "I bring it," said Ned, and he carried the sword himself, refusing the hand of any squire. Its weight was cool upon his palms, a mountain stream made steel. He had not unsheathed it since the tower. He did not think he would ever ask to hold it again. Ashera awaited them in a high room that gave upon the river bend. Her gown was the color of the sky an hour before sunset. She had not put kohl to her eyes or powder to her lids. She wore no ornaments. She sat as if she had forgotten how to sit and had set herself down by accident. When she rose, the motion was the single graceful thing in a room full of things not graceful at all. "Lord Eddard," she said. Her voice was dry as the wind that combed the lemon trees. "I see you come with a sword and not with my brother." Ned placed the sheathed blade upon the table between them and set his hands behind him so that they could not offend. "Lady Ashera," he said, "your brother bore this longer than most men bear breath. He asked no mercy and gave none without need. I have no words that do not darken this room, and I have no tears that are not already spilt." She touched the sheath as if she expected it to be warm. "Arthur was a man who did not lie," she said. "He did not lie to me, and he did not lie for me. He did not lie for anyone." One corner of her mouth twitched as if some wrestler inside her had tried to pull her lips into a smile and failed. "He was a chivalrous liar only in the songs. In life he was only true, and so I will be the same with you. There are tales men tell, Lord Stark, to make themselves bearable. They have put my name into them without asking. Shall I throw myself from a tower for their relief, to make their lie tidy?" Howland Reed's head turned, one frost-green eye on her and one on Ned. Ned bowed. "If you wish to live, my lady, live. If you wish to howl, howl. I came to give you truth, and the sword, and nothing else." "You came to give me a sword," she said. "Yet you carry something that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with me." She nodded toward Ned's breast where the bundle lay under mail, and Ned felt cold. She was not wrong. Arthur Dane had been many things to many people. Brother, sword, witness. Ned dismissed the servants. They left like ghosts, the door closing soft as a kiss. "My lady," he said, "I carry letters. I carry witness. I carry my sister's son." Ashera did not move. The river slapped the walls and ran on. "Speak the rest," she said after a time, and there was ash in her voice. "They will say I fathered him on some girl," Ned answered. "They will say I fathered him on you. They will say too many things, until the babble covers the truth like sand." He told her of Lyanna and the bed of blood. He told her of the Kingsguard dead and the promise that had gripped his fingers until they bruised. He told her of the letters and the witnesses and the star upon wax. He did not give her pages to hold. He told her enough that she could see the shape of it without being made to bleed at its edges. She listened with her head slightly tilted, as if hearing a song played in a room below this one. When he had done, she sat with her hands upon her lap. The river ran. Above that, some bird cried and was answered. "He brought a septon," she said at last. "Of course he did. Arthur would not have kept his sword there else. All that is true, and all that truth is as useless as a broken helm. What would you have of me, Lord Stark of Winterfell?" Ned almost told her he would have her alive and standing, because Winterfell could not bear the weight of ghosts he had not earned. But that was his burden, not hers. "I would have rumor," he said. I would have a lie that is both kind and wicked. I would have you say that I wronged you, if that will save a life." Her laugh was small, like a knife drawn a hand's breadth from its sheath. "You have wronged me, Eddard Stark," she said, and for the first time used his given name. "You came into my father's hall with a sword red to the hilt. You bring me my brother's blade and not his breath. You bring me the end of a world in a paper box. If I say you fathered a child on me, it costs me nothing more than men have already stolen. So here is my rumor. I will be your sin, and I will not leap for your convenience." Ned bowed his head. "I am sorry," he said, quite uselessly, and she lifted her chin like a lance in response. He saw then the thing that had made men mistake her for fragile. Her face was a piece of glass so clear you could see mountains through it. Willa came to them that evening, a maid with strong wrists and a square jaw and a laugh that had never been delicate. She had wet-nursed Arthur when his mother's milk had gone to salt, so the steward told him, and the gods have a taste for circles. She took the infant from the arms of the girl who had tended Lyanna and put him to breast as if he were a lamb. She called him sweet names in the Dornish tongue that made Howland smile, and the boy slept, and after that they fed him with spoon and finger and whatever dignity could attach to hunger. Ned stood in the doorway and watched for a long time, because if he blinked there were images behind his eyes that might take him by the throat. The road north smelled of dust and orange peel. They rode in a staggered line, not so close together as to draw a bandit's eye, not so far apart that a man could be pulled down without kindly eyes to see it. They crossed the Greenblood where it spread its fingers and went to weeds, and then at last came to salty marsh and the smell of the mother's milk from the sea. At each hall where they begged a night of shelter, Ned said the same thing. A bastard boy of House Stark, born of a girl he would not name, traveling with his lord father. The men looked at him and looked at the boy and made their faces into caution and respect. One man winked. One woman kissed Ned's hand and called him a wolf twice, once for his face and once for his kindness in not leaving the child behind. When at last they came to Winterfell, the air smelled like iron and wet stone. The ravens croaked madness. Ned dismounted and could feel his father's gaze in the gate, his grandfather's carved mouth in the great hall, the old kitchen fires running beneath his feet like roots. Catelyn stood upon the steps in a gown the blue of deep water, Rob a bundle in her arms, a tuft of auburn hair damp upon his scalp. She was fair and she was careful. In the Riverlands they had taught girls to carry their skins with quiet dignity. Here in the north the wind did that teaching for us, old Maester Whaleys had told him once. She looked at the child in Willa's arms and at her husband. She stood straight as a spear tower and said nothing. That had been the plan. Before his horse's hooves had touched Winterfell's soil, Ned had made and unmade 1,000 speeches. When he stood before his lady, he found he had none. Howley Reed set himself 3 paces back, half-shadowed by Hullen and Jory, and the men of Winterfell looked elsewhere, even those with the least sense and most curiosity. Willa put the baby into Ned's arms. "This is John," Ned said. He did not know how the name had come to him. It had sprung upward as a fish springs, and he had closed his hand. "He is my blood." He almost choked on the next words. "He is not yours," he said softly, "for her and no one else." Catelyn's throat worked. Her fingers pressed the cloth of her skirt until her knuckles went white. She looked down at the bundle in her own arms and smoothed Rob's hair, and then looked at Ned again with a kind of thoughtfulness that had always unraveled him. "I shall not shame him," she said. "Nor you. I will not love him. He needs only to live," Ned answered, feeling something within him loosen, and something else twist itself into a tighter knot. After that, Winterfell took John in the way Winterfell took in any creature left within its walls long enough. The stable cats flicked their tails, gave him their yellow regard, and let him pass. The old gray wolf in the yard, too arthritic to hunt, allowed the babe to tug the fur at his ruff and merely huffed. The kitchen girls made faces over him and argued in whispers whether his hair was more like his father's or some foreign jade. Old Nan, with her stories of dead kings and wicked white shadows, held him without fuss and looked down upon him with her eyes like worn coins. "Here's a little snow," she said, drift tucked up in the lee of the hall. And sometimes when he cried in the night, Catelyn would turn her face to the cold side of the bed and hold herself very still and listen to the sound of her husband's footfalls in the corridor. Maester Luwin came to Ned in the Solar a month after, his hands ink-dark and smelling of the herb he chewed to tame his stomach. "My lord," he said, "letters have come down from the Eyrie. Lord Arryn asks if you are whole. He asks if the war is over in your heart." "The war is never over," Ned said. He thought of the coffer. He had placed it beneath a flagstone in the crypts. In a niche behind the third king passed the kings of winter whose names the singers still remembered. He had done it himself with a prybar and a lamp, while the cold made his breath smoke and the stone made his palms raw. The coffer's lid had rasped against the cement as if complaining. He had set Lynna's ring atop it and replaced the stone until it sat even again. If a man wished to find that place, he would have to count. It is hard for some men to count when they are terrified. He sent Jon Arryn a letter that spoke of fields and calves and the number of hands it took to skin an elk. At the bottom, after the polite words, he wrote in a careful, unbeautiful hand, "The wind is cold." That was a thing both men would understand. From the Eyrie there came no reply to that line, and that too was a reply. The snows came late that year and left early, so all men told him it would mean a blessed spring. In the Riverlands, war had stamped the mud hard, and when it rained, the land remembered. Word came up the King's Road of this lord taken into the small council and that one set aside, of Tywin Lannister's cold authority setting house to house like game pieces, of Robert Baratheon's wedding to Cersei of Casterly Rock and the feast that ran 7 days. Ned drank his ale from a horn and said nothing. The raven that came after that one bore a sealed note in a neat, tidy hand that did not look like Robert's eye and fist at all. "Brother," it read, "come south if you can. The seas are rough with storms, and I am sick with the smell of lamb in summer. Bring your silence. I miss you." Catelyn pressed the path of her lips between the lines. "If you go," she said, "you go to play the game of pretty words and vile men. You have always been poor at pretty words." "I will write him," Ned said. "I will send him the truth I can afford." He did not send any truth he could not afford. Howland Reed watched him with that still gaze of his and said nothing, and the women of Winterfell charted the boy's growth with their eyes and remarks the way they would have measured the height of beanstalks. Jon was quick to turn and quicker to smile, solemn when he listened. He took to the gods wood more than he took to the sept. That much made Luwin smile with a scholar's patience and sent Catelyn to the sept more often than before, to burn candles and kneel. Ned saw what that kneeling cost her, and he loved her for it more than for any silk or secret. On the morning the raven told them the first teeth of the stag had been set on the crown, Ned took Jon to the crypts. They went alone. Jon had one hand on Ned's finger and the other spread, as if he could steady the darkness by smoothing it. They moved past Lord Ricard's stone where the sculptor had carved sad, proud eyes and the seed of a curse in the set of the mouth. Past Brandon whose sword was too large even in stone. Past kings that men kept oaths to long after their bones had become dust. "There," Ned said softly, with a move of his chin, and did not look. Jon did. He squinted into the corner and made the small sound a child makes when he sees something he cannot name. "Cold," he said. "So am I," Ned told him. "We are Starks." He crouched and gathered the boy in, and the boy's hands went to his father's hair, as if he recognized it. Ned rested his forehead for a time against the boy's temple. "Listen," he said to the stone and the air and the boy. "Listen to me. I will keep you." Spring came and then summer, and both lay thin as spilt milk. Men came north with their tongues piled high with tails, and they left with their mouths full of meat and their eyes full of pine. Jon learned to walk. Robb learned to swing a stick like a sword, and Bran learned to grin until he fell over and put a wail into the rafters. Sansa's hair came in deep as her mother's. Arya arrived kicking, and then the whole household revolved around the axes of milk and bread and scraped knees and sleepless nights. Ned wrote to Jon Arryn from time to time, letters that asked after eagles and the price of stone, and sometimes enclosed a map he had drawn in a careful hand of the North Road after some washout and rebuilding. Once, only once, He wrote a letter that began "My lord" and finished "My brother," and said, at the bottom of ink that had blotted twice, "I have something you must not ask me for." And the answer came 3 weeks later, folded into a note about the line of succession for Farwind of the Lonely Light, and it said in John Aaron's crisp hand, across an ice lake, "You hold a little flame cupped in your hands. The wind is high. If you ask me to blow, I will not." The Greyjoy rebellion cracked the quiet like ice. The raven came in autumn. Ned read the scrap of leather-thin vellum and went straight to the yard without speaking, and the yard knew before he said a word. Banners came out of corners like men. Why they should care if the Ironborn had painted kings on their barges again. The small folk asked one another over trencher and cup, and then they remembered the shape of ships in their nightmares from the old days and crossed themselves with thumb and fingers. Ned went to war again, more tired and more sure that he knew nothing of men. He left Robb in Catelyn's care and kissed each of his children once, and Jon twice. Jon stood very straight and said nothing at all. His jaw set like a man who knows he cannot stop the thing that will break his heart but intends to stand when it hits. He was 8. When Ned rode away, he heard, faint beneath the clatter of hooves and harness, the soft sound of a boy swallowing tears. A mile down the King's Road, Howland Reed said, "You left your heart in a snowbank." "I have left it in worse places," Ned replied, and touched the mail where the letters had once rested, and were gone now to colder stone. War is a mill with an endless appetite. It ground the Ironborn, and it ground good men in gray and green. It ground the sea to froth and the shore to rubble. Ned did his duty until it had chewed enough and let go. He took Theon Greyjoy as a ward, which was a mercy or a cruelty or both, depending upon which old man at which hearth you asked in later years. He came home with salt in his hair and a love for silence that had not been born in him before war had made it necessary. Jon stood in the yard like a sapling that had outgrown the stake that had once held it true. He had Alaric's sword in his hand and its point was down, which pleased Ned more than any strike would have done. He said nothing of the letters to Theon, nor to Catelyn, nor to anyone but Howland Reed. Once, in the Godswood, when the first snow of a new winter was in the air and the leaves of the heart tree looked as if their veins were full of wine, Ned said, "If I die, Greywater takes the boy. If you die," said Howland, "the bog will swallow him and spit him out, and he will stand. You are not allowed to die." He set a frog spear against the root and looked at Ned sidelong. "Men wearing gold will come to you with torches someday," he said mildly. "You have stationed water in the path of their fire, but water does not always know its duty in time to be useful." "Then I will try to be the barrel," Ned replied. "We will see if they float, or drown." The North breathed, slow and deep. Years put rings under their skin that only the gods could count. Jon grew. He grew into his bones and his silence and the way he tilted his head when a man told him something he did not believe. He learned from Mikken how a sword must be oiled after rain, and from Hullen how a horse's temper is often the mirror of a rider's. He learned from old Ser Roderick that some men were too proud to be sensible, and from Jory that sense was pride's only cure. He learned, too, to read in Lewin's tower, where he would sit with a book and the maester would sit with a goblet, and both would make noises as they turned their pages. He liked tales of the Dawn Age, and he liked the maps of the Riverlands, and he liked, more than he liked those, to carry questions into the Godswood and set them at the base of the heart tree without any hope of answer. The old gods rarely answered in any way a man recognized. Yet he would come back from the wood with his mouth set and his eyes calm, and when he went to sleep, he slept as boys sleep who have earned it. Sometimes he dreamt of a tower in the sun with a singing river, though he had never seen it. The letters in the crypt were patient, which is the way of letters and bones both. They did not give off light or rattle like chains. They lay and let time run across them. Varys's little birds learned many things in those years, but they did not learn the names under that stone. Littlefinger heard much and could count coin fast enough to make the sound of clinking silver cover the sound of truth, but he did not hear the sound of a crannogman sigh beneath a root. Tywin Lannister, who had ears like hooks in a sea with fat fish, did not hear, because the north was too far and too cold for men who liked the taste of oranges. The thing that was kept because men who kept it remembered what it was. It was a hunting summer when Robert came north with a roaring train like a storm on horseback, banners snapping bright as flames. The king was larger than Ned remembered and smaller too, the way men grow when seen by boys and then remembered by men. He had no time to be more than one kind of man at once. He came to Winterfell with pride and hunger and a belly that made his belt complain. He put his arms around Ned and clapped his back with blows that would have unhorsed a less sturdy lord. He called Catelyn a jewel and kissed her hand and then kissed it again besides, because Robert always took more than he ought to and always thought it made him generous. He lifted Robb off his feet and made little Rickon stare and made Arya grin despite herself and made Sansa curtsy lower than was sensible. Then he saw Jon. He did not know he had seen him, or perhaps he did and chose the cowardice that men mistake for tact. Robert looked at the boy as men look at a hound not their own, and then away. He asked for meat and beer. He asked for women to sing and men to drink with him till dawn. He did not ask about the snow-haired child standing slightly to the left of the stairs. That night in the solar, Robert drank and sweated and called for Ned to come south and be his hand. He bellowed while the candles guttered. He spoke of lions and the need to keep them muzzled with a northern hand that would not tire. He spoke of friendship as if it were a thing a man could throw like a rope around the neck of duty. He spoke of the times they had wrestled in the dust under the trees at the Eyrie, when both of them had thought they could not be bent by anything in the world. And Ned listened, and remembered that he had once believed that too. "I have a duty here," he said, when the king had run out of breath. "Winterfell cannot govern itself." "Benjen will mind your duties," said Robert. "Catelyn will mind your children. Your eldest is half a man already. And my hand will mind me." He grinned. "If you think I can be minded." Ned did not smile. He had never been the kind of man Robert needed, only the kind he deserved. "The South is full of snares." "Then you will cut them," Robert said, and refilled his cup. He came to Catelyn in the dark, when the raven of his mind would not roost. She turned toward him and set her hand upon his chest and felt the hammer of his heart. "If you must go," she said, before he had spoken. "Is that the shape of it?" "I must," he said, surprising himself with the word. "The Lannisters have made a garden of knives and left them point up. He is a man with bare feet. If I stay, I am brave, and brave men are dead men more often than not. If I go, I am a fool. Perhaps a fool will live long enough to know why he is one." Catelyn was quiet for a time. She had the gift of useful silence, like space around a stone that lets you see the stone. "You will take the boy," she said then, and Ned could not tell whether she had meant Robb or Jon. It mattered, and it did not. "I will take Arya," he said, "and Sansa. If I leave both, they will be used as weights upon your ankles. I will take a man to whom sewers talk and another who knows the smell of a slaver's purse. I will take my stubbornness." He swallowed. "I will leave Jon." A small sound, and then he realized Catelyn had laughed, not unkindly. "You cannot carry him between king and queen," she said. "He is safer in the place where a man with sense rules." Sometimes the greatest shield is a quiet room. He wanted to tell her then, to turn the hearth into a mouth that would swallow their words whole and keep them. He wanted to give her relief from the thing she had borne so hard and so well. He did not. He bore his promise like a stone and kept it upon his tongue until it made him speak carefully. Jon came to him the next morning with dawn on his shoulders and asked, with a boy's abruptness that is only honesty in a thinner coat, if he might go with them. "I could squire," he said, "to Jory or to you. I am not foolish with a horse. I do not take up much room." Ned's ears drained. "You are my blood," he said. He could not say, "You are my king," though it might be truth, and he could not say, "You would die if the wrong man's eyes fell on you." "I will send you north to the wall when you have the measure of a man, if that is a thing you still want then." Jon's face did not change. He had learned not to let his face tell men what they did not deserve to know. "I may be good for little else," he said, and the words were bitter, though he did not fling them. Then his mouth eased at one corner. "If you will not take me south, father, take care to come back north." Men who stay too long under a southern sun begin to smell of lemons. I will return, Ned said, and believed it because believing it was the only way to go. At the last, when the train was packed and the horses shod and fed, and the royal procession had the look of a town that had uprooted itself to move, Howland Reed came to the yard and stood with his hands folded. He had a look of a man who had just found a frog where he knew there had been a lily. You will have watchers in the south, he said. Men who like words as knives. I have always been dull at knives, Ned said. I will surround myself with men who are not. Varys will smell the north on you and think of wet leaves. Littlefinger will see the size of your pockets and think he can turn you into coin. The queen will look at your daughters and see her own reflection. Take a mirror with you, Ned Stark, and do not look at it until you must. Ned clasped his hand in both of his, and in that grip was a thing deeper than any oath he had ever made aloud. Guard what we have buried, he said. I will sit upon it like a toad, Howland replied, and gave the ghost of a grin. Toads are not noble, but they are stubborn. Be a little toad in the south if you can. The gods are busy. We must do our own work. They rode. South lay stories that had already been told and would be told again with more lies in them. The road wound from hill to hill. The air lost its bite and began to smell of fruit and old stone. The king made their camp riotous and the queen made it orderly, and between those two currents the water ran muddy. Ned spent his days in the saddle and his nights watching men's eyes. When at last the Red Keep rose out of its island like a dragon hunkered among its own bones, he tasted metal on his tongue. The city was heat and stink and glint. The smell of human beings stacked atop one another until they began to smell less like human beings and more like their wastes and the stew they made from their leavings. He thought of Winterfell until his heart was a clenched fist and then released it. He set the sigil of the hand upon his breast and went to work. Men came to him in that first week with petitions thick as coughs in a winter house. A fisherman with salt in his beard who swore that the tax on his catch would drown him when the chains did not. A silk seller whose connies had turned to moths. A woman with a bruised eye and a boy whose lip had been split who accused a gold cloak of taking what was not his. Ned heard all. He judged as best he could. That was the easy labor, like carrying logs, weight and sweat, but no great thought. The wicked labor was smiling at a viper and not flinching in your eyes. Varys came in with feet soft as cats and a smell of powder to his skin and voice. Littlefinger slid, coin bright. Pycelle coughed and drooled and looked at him with bulging eyes that would have been harmless upon any other head. Renly wore jests. Barristan Selmy wore the gravity of a man who could lift his own in his hands. And there, beyond them all, the queen, bright as wrapped steel, and behind her brother's hand upon his sword hilt like a gambler's finger drifting near the slit in the table. None of them knew of the letters under a stone. That steadied him. He could speak to them with his face only, without ever risking the word that would set the board afire. When Robert, red-faced with wine, spoke of Targaryens and the way dragons must be barred from any nest near the king's peace, Ned spoke to him of taxes and ports and iron. When Cersei asked honeyed questions about Winterfell's bastards and the customs of naming, he spoke of snow and the way it fell at first light. He sent Jory to speak to men with long ears and short tempers. He sent a boy to sit near the kitchen sluices and listen. He sent a coin to one man and a loaf to another and remembered every face. He wrote to Catelyn about the market in silk and the price of lemons and the way Sansa enjoyed the sight of the queen's dresses and Arya enjoyed the sight of the queen's ire. He wrote to Robb about duty and to Bran about climbing, which words were cautions, and to Jon about swords, which words were not. His letters never used the word that mattered until his fingers itched. He let them itch. He did not scratch. At night, in the small hours, when the city had the look of a creature that had been beaten and had settled its breathing into a cadence that would get it through to dawn, he would lie awake and think of the flame he held cupped, and of the wind that made his fingers burn. The first blow did not come from the place he watched. Blows never do. A raven from the Vale came with a complaint about stone and tithe and the question of whether a lesser lord had sent the wrong man to the place where a better man should have stood, because that is the shape of Vale arguments. The letter carried a smear of grease that could only have been Jon Arryn's hand. He had eaten while he wrote. Ned smiled when he saw it. Then, where Jon's hand should have signed, a clerk had written for him. Their eyes slid off the words. The words were precise, as Jon's always were. They did not taste like him. He went to see Jon Arryn. It was the kind of courtesy men forget they knew when power makes their feet heavy. He went on foot. He went without any sigil pinned upon his cloak. He took only 2 guards and told them to wait at the base of the Ares embassy quarter stairs. He went up the steps alone and felt younger than he had in a decade, because these were the steps he had climbed with his brother once, to beg a man to be a father to them both. Jon Arryn stood in his chamber with the window open to the east, his hand upon the stone. His hair had gone white in the years since they had last sat face to face. His face had gone to its bones. He turned. "Ned," he said, and there was the man in the sound of it. Then he half smiled, and a shadow passed across his face like a cloud across a plowed field. "They read my letters," he said without preamble. "It is tiresome to write when a man reads over your shoulder." Ned closed the door. Then he came forward and took the old man by the shoulders, and both laughed as men laugh when their lives have been too heavy and they are amazed to find that laughter still exists. When Hay sat, it was like sitting down to an old meal that had been kept warm. They spoke of nothing that mattered for the length of a cup. Then Jon Arryn set his aside and said, in a tone too casual by half, "I had a visit the other day from a young man with hair the color of a raven and eyes the color of a river stone. He asked me whether I believed in the old tales of Summerhall and the way of oaths." Ned's hand did not tremble. "He asked," he said, "the wrong man." "Let us be 2 wrong men together," said Jon Arryn with a ghost of a grin. Then his face sobered, and he leaned forward, and his voice dropped. "If I were to fall, if something were to happen to me, if the Lannisters were to bring me low and call it illness, I think my lady would run, and I think she would run where I once kept a boy who was not mine, safe from a world that did not wish to see a Stark become a man." "The Aerie," Ned said, and that was not so much a question as a vow. Jon Arryn's eyes dipped to the place beneath Ned's heart, a look so quick that even a man with eyes like Varys would have missed it. "I wonder if you have found the winters as long and the coffers as light as a man might expect," he said in a normal voice. "I wonder if you have had cause to think often of your dead." "Every day," Ned said, and the words were like the sound of a coin falling into a well with no bottom. They spoke of other matters, then, and they did not speak of the boy in Winterfell who liked the gods wood more than the September. When Ned returned to the Red Keep, he found the Queen in the corridor outside his chambers, her hand on Sansa's shoulder and her smile a work of art she had learned to make in some other mirror than the one Howland had warned him to carry. "Lord Hand," she said, "your daughters grow as befits girls of good name. I hope they will learn from my own in good time." "I hope they will learn from your caution," Ned replied, and the Queen's eyes went slightly flat, like a cat's, though her smile did not move. It was a small thing, that flinching of a glance. Men would say later that battles turned on the point of a lance or on the fire put to a door. That small flinch put into Ned Stark a sense of time, like a nail put into a plank. He began to count backward from the day the first snows would come. He wrote to Winterfell that night. The letter was long and plain. He told Robb to see the harvest right and spoke of the price of salt fish and of bannermen who required a reminder of their duties. He told Bran to keep both feet on the ground. He told Arya to listen twice for every once she spoke and told Sansa to keep her needle. In both the senses women took that word. He told Catelyn he loved her and that he loved her more for hating this city. Then he took up a small strip of vellum and a knife and cut the strip thin and wrote upon it in a script that was half his and half Rhaegar's. "If ravens are killed, a swan will come." He rolled it into the hollow of a quill and sealed a plain message to Howland Reed beneath it that said only that the carp were plentiful in the ponds this year, and a man might catch 2 with a single spear if he were deft. In the north, the marsh grudge's reply came slow as anything that knows it will be long-lived. Weeks later, a basket from the Trident, carried by a fishwife whose husband owed a Kaelan sergeant a favor, reached the kitchens of Winterfell. Inside, beneath onions and beside a wrapped eel that smelled of mud and clean rain, there was a carved wooden frog with its mouth stopped with wax. Inside the frog was a twist of bark. The bark said, "The swan has poor feathers for long flight, but it will swim if it must. Keep the reeds thick." And beneath that line, in a hand not like Howland's at all, in a neat scholar's script was written, "The old gods watch." Varys's birds were busy on other roofs. It was not one blow, then, but the wearing down that ruins any blade. Days and looks and the endless, treacherous drift of time. Jory footed in with a jaw set too hard. The gold cloak stared too long at Arya and did not stare at Sansa at all. Men met Ned's eye and blinked too fast. In council, they spoke of tournaments, which are war for men with coin and time to love the sound of their own names shouted. And they argued where the hand's purse would bleed and how to mend it with blood that did not belong to the men in the room. Ned kept the city from becoming a field, and he kept himself from becoming wheat. One night, much later than a man should be awake, when the wine had gone and the moon had gone and only the smell of the city remained when you shut your eyes, he heard the smallest rustle. He reached for the knife he kept in his bed and then for the voice that lived in him and kept him from using it. "If you are here to kill me," he said into the darkness, "you have had to climb a mountain of stairs and pass the men who know the sound of a foot that is not their lord's." A small laugh, like a moth's wing. "If I were here to kill you, Lord Stark, we would speak in another room." Varys slid into the faint wash of light that the banked fire offered. "I am here to speak of children," he said, "and of the games men play around them." Ned said nothing. That was safety with Varys. "The king enjoys his cups," Varys said softly. "The queen does not. She is the cup. She is empty until a man pours something into her. She does not enjoy being a vessel. She prefers to be the table." "You will forgive me," Ned said, "if I do not take metaphors from a man who fixes the world to his own words." Varys smiled. "I forgive all things to the men who do not require my forgiveness," he murmured. "Lord Stark, a child will die soon. I would like it not to be more than one." Ned thought of the stone and the letters and the cold. "A child. The child of a man who does not father children," Varys answered blandly. "They let that hang between them like a lantern that would not be lit." Ned's heart beat. The old gods, if they watched in the south, watched without leaves. "You have found some shame to fling at a woman," he said at last, "to make a man easier to push." "I have found a truth," Varys replied, and his eyes were heavy with it. "I have many truths. I know which to throw and which to swallow. Which shall I do with this one, Stark of Winterfell?" Ned looked at the embers and saw in them the reflection of a frozen pond above which a boy had stood, and beneath which a current had carried another boy away. He saw men with dragon brooches upon their chests and a woman whose hair had stuck to her cheeks with sweat. He saw a king with a boar's tusk in his belly, though that lay ahead still. He saw it anyway, because there are some stories men who have lost enough can taste on their tongues before the first word is spoken. "You will swallow it," he said, "and you will keep your throat shut." Varys's eyes did not change. "My throat is never shut," he said pleasantly. "I am a man of appetites. But for you I will tuck this truth behind my tongue, for a time, because I think you carry something behind your tongue that would light the whole city at once, if it fell. And I am not yet tired of my amenities." He stood. "You are a winter man, Lord Stark. There are summers a man can stand in a northern room if he has a stout roof. Keep your roof stout." When he had gone, Ned lay again and stared at the ceiling and counted the beats of his heart like a farmer who knows how much grain is left in his barn by the sound it makes when a man walks upon it. He slept near dawn, the way a man drops into a well and finds the bottom soft. Days turn into weeks and then the world cracks. Robert went hunting because men who are good at war think themselves good at anything with blood in it. He went with Lancel Lannister and his laughter and his thirst, and came back white as a fish's belly. He bled in the great bed carved for kings, and his words were confused, and Ned sat beside him and felt the edges of everything he knew becoming knives. "Tell me a lie," Robert said, panting, the sweat running like rain down the sides of his face. "Tell me that we have time." "We have time to speak," Ned said. "Say what you would have said and did not. That is time enough." Robert stared at him, and then the old Robert came, like a man climbing out of a cave. "You always tell me the worst thing at once," he said, and there was kindness in it and no kindness at all. "Make me right. Make me say the thing. This is why I needed you. The rest is girls." They made the will then, and the will named a son that was not a son, and the will named Ned in a place where men too often named their enemies. The ink dried. The boat that carried the will out into the flats met a woman with cheekbones like knives and hair bright as wheat at the harvest. Turned back, and Ned Stark, who had carried a promise through a world that had tried to break it into words and sell it in pieces, looked at the queen and at her brother and at the thing they had made, and he knew 2 winters had arrived in 1 season. He went to Littlefinger. He went with all the sense a man could gather from stark mornings and honest work. He asked for help. Littlefinger smiled with his eyes, but his heart could not be seen. "I can," he said. "Of course I can. Help is a thing I sell. It is dear and cheap as a man wishes." He put Ned's honor on a scale with Ned's fear and showed him both measures and did not tell him which was which. Ned told the queen. He told her to run. He told her to take her children and leave the city where men made red noise between smooth walls. He told her because he thought mercy was a kind of armor. He told her because he had forgotten that there were some games a man should not play with an open hand. She smiled the same smile she had given him in the corridor, and this time it did not hide its edge. "You wear truth like a gown," she said. "It is not flattering. I wear it because my wife will not think me naked," he answered and left her. Littlefinger betrayed him, as men with thin mouths betray men with thick hearts. Steel sang in corridors. Swords caught candlelight like a last prayer. The hand of the king, who had never been much good at knives, stood with a blade in his fist and would not run. Jory fell in a way that made his body look like the letter of a law a man had forgotten to read. The gold cloaks shouted, and then the shouting turned to grunts, and then to the old sound any yard makes when men hit the ground after having been alive. They took him in irons to a place that was meant to hold him until he died or until someone clever turned his life into coin. Varys came to him in a hood by a back stair and whispered that a ship could be got, if a man could be got to the ship. "Greywater," he said, as idly as a man says rain. "Does it have a dock?" "Only for reeds," Ned murmured, and Varys smiled the way a man smiles when a child says something lovely and wrong. On a night when the moon was barely a skim on the milk of the sky, Catelyn held a strip of parchment in the godswood and read words that she did not read with her eyes. She read them with the inside of her, with the part of her that knew how to make a bed tight and a life tighter, how to bend without breaking. The letter had come in the stomach of a gutted trout delivered to a kitchen that had smelled of garlic and fat. It said, "If the sea is too rough for swans, reeds suffice." It said, "Tell the marsh to rise if the stone sinks." It said, at last, in a hand that was not Ned's and not Howland's but was the sort of hand a good scribe would use to write down ugly truths in short words. "He will not bend. Do not let him break." She sent Roderick with men who knew the dark of the Wolfwoods as if it were their own blood. She sent fast horses and slower mules with grain. She sent coin. She sent, too, a small boy with a frog spear and a knife, south as far as a man with a sword could wade, and told him to wait where the water tasted of salt and mud together. The old gods watched. They always did, which is not the same as acting. In the city, the queen built her trap with care, because she had learned that care was the only way to win against luck. Sansa wept for tourneys and for pretty princes and for the idea of a life that had never had room for truth. Arya ran. The boys of the street ran too, and those who lived had a talent for corners and knives. Neddard Stark's name ran before him like fire in a wheat field, and men came to put it out and to warm their hands on it. The black cells inhaled their cold. When at last a door creaked, it was not Varys with a bird's tread but a man with a gait like a cat and a scar that made other men uneasy to look at him. "Up," said the man, quick as illness. "Whose coin?" Ned asked, and the man grinned. "Sometimes a man takes payment in words he wants to hear," the man said, and they went. Up stairwells and under archways and along a passage where Ned once had walked with a sword upon his hip and his name upon his tongue. through a door that opened into a store of rough salt and another door that opened onto night. There was a smell of tar and rotted rope. There was the smell of the sea. Shadows moved. A boat slid from behind a thicker one. Howland Reed sat in the stern with his hands on the oars and his eyes on a star that men who had no business in bogs would have thought was the wrong star. Ned sat and breathed, and each breath tasted like iron and river and home. The oars bit in. "You looked like a man in a trap," said Howland, after they had put their backs to the city, and the sound of it was like the sound of a thing a man hears when he presses a shell to his ear. "I am a man with a spear and a dislike of traps. I brought a knife." "What did you bring for the dogs who will come after?" Ned asked. "Water," said Howland and smiled thinly. "I have brought a great deal of water." They put him on a quaking plank of marsh where the air was full of midges and the few stars visible were smeared with fog. There the reeds did indeed rise. They closed around him. They made men turn aside without quite knowing why. They made him small. They carried him without moving him. A week later, he walked into Winterfell from a road no one used and felt the old stones find their friend. Catelyn went to him with a step that men would think calm, and that was not calm at all. He put his head to hers and held her to him and did not speak the gratitude that if spoken would have broken his voice. "The city?" she asked after a time, as if the city were a man they both knew and disliked. "The city is made of lies," he said. "I left some in it." He slept then, and when he woke, he went to the crypt and lit a candle and found the stone. He lifted the rock and looked at the coffer and then lifted the coffer and looked at the ring. He did not open it. He set it back and set the stone and rested his hands on his thighs for a little while. The candle burned, and wax ran down its side and puddled like fat. Then he returned to the world where men wanted bread. The raven came 2 days later, frantic with flight. The king was dead. The boy king sat his throne, and his mother sat his throne, and all the chairs in the room besides. Men spoke of treason and truth in the same breath with different meanings. They asked for Ned Stark and did not know whether they wanted him to live or die. He stood at the top of the steps before the great hall of Winterfell. He had never looked more like his father. He had never felt less like any father in the world. He wrote a letter to Jon Arryn and did not send it. He wrote a letter to Howland and tucked it into a frog's mouth and did. He wrote to Robb and told him to be a lord and wait. He wrote to Catelyn, though she was in the next room, and said, "You saved me," which was not a sentence about his life alone. Jon came to him at dusk with the smell of the yard's dust still on him. He stood as he had stood at 8. Now he was nearly a man. His jaw had learned itself. His eyes were Rhaegar's when he was thinking. "Father," he said, "tell me something to hold." Ned looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "There are winters within winters, Jon. There are wars within wars. Men will bid you go south and make a song of yourself. Men will bid you go north and freeze your heart and call it strength. I have done both. The only thing a man can do in such weathers is keep a promise." "What promise?" asked Jon, because he was brave enough to appear simple when that would make other men tell him something true. "The promise that makes you a Stark," Ned said. "To stand, to shelter, to feed when the snows take longer than any man reckons. To keep his word even when the word tastes like iron. You will have your own promises. I will not choose them for you." Jon breathed, and his breath made a small cloud in the air. "I have dreamed of a tower," he said, and did not look away, though that made the words dangerous. "I have dreamed of a tower, and of the smell of flowers in the heat, and of a woman who cries and a man whose sword is pale as milk." Ned closed his eyes. It would have been easier if the boy had lied. "You will dream all your life," he said. "Dreams are a kind of snow. You can die in them if you lie down." Then, because he could not help himself and because he had carried his silence so long it had worn grooves into him, he said very softly, "You are the best of me." He did not tell him anything else. He did not tell him the way the words would pour out of him if he began, the way they had poured out of Robert once upon a time and drowned them both almost. He held his hill in the storm. In the south, a lion roared until it thought it had silenced the world. In the east, An ocean the color of forged steel breathed in and out and did not care about any of it. In the far, far north, the wind pushed at trees that had stood since before men put names to the things they feared. In the riverlands, a lady in gray moved through the reeds with a frog spear and a letter tucked into her hair. On an island that only moved when it intended to, a man with eyes the color of moss sat with his back to a root and hummed a song that had no ending. The world grew narrower, or wider. It depends on which window a man looks out of. Year turned to year. Boy turned to man. Men who thought their names would outlast their breath died, as men do. Swords broke and were mended. Vows broke and were never mended. The stone of the crypt did not move. The letters beneath it learned patience from the bones above them. One winter morning, when the trees were dressed like soldiers and the air burned the inside of a man's nose, Ned Stark went alone to the Godswood. His breath was a plume before him, and his boots squeaked as they came up off the hard snow. He set his hand upon the heart tree's smooth, cold face. He did not ask for anything. He stood and listened to the winter. Behind him, the crunch of footsteps. He did not turn. You do not turn upon a man you have heard walk the Godswood since he could walk. Father, Jon said. Ned kept his hand upon the tree. You have decided. Yes, said Jon. You will go north, Ned said softly, and could not tell whether he asked or said. Yes, and you will take your wolf. Yes, and you will keep your word to yourself, when no one else would know if you broke it. Jon was silent for a long time. Then he said, That is why I am going. Ned turned. His son stood with the snow upon his hair like a crown no man had asked to set upon him. Behind him the world was white and quiet. You must know this, Ned said. I have been wrong more than I have been right. I have made hard choices and easy ones, and sometimes told myself the hard ones were easy because it sounded braver. I do not tell you this to make you doubt. I tell you this to make you generous with yourself when you err. A man who would keep his promises must allow that he is a man. Jon nodded. He had learned to move like that once and fully. He came forward and set his hand beside his father's upon the weirwood. His gloves left no warmth upon the bark at all. What did she ask you to promise? He asked at last, and Ned let the winter hit his teeth and tasted it. To keep you, he said, to keep you safe from men like me. Jon laughed very gently, and that laugh was a blade and a salve at once. I am not safe from any man, he said, least of all myself. He looked up into the face the old gods wore here. But I will keep others. I think that is the only way to be kept. Ned stepped back and let the tree and the boy regard each other without him. He had learned, late and painfully, that a father's greatest labor was sometimes not to speak. When the time came for Jon to ride, the yard held its breath. Men made jokes to keep their mouths from cracking with truth. Girls whose hair smelled of ash and bread looked at him with their heads not quite as high as their pride wished. Catelyn stood upon the steps and did not speak and did not move and did not put a hand upon her throat as she wished to. Her dignity was the armor she wore when her heart wished to flee her body. Robb put his hands upon Jon's shoulders and squeezed, and the two boys were men with the same truth in their grips for a moment. Come back, Robb said, and Jon gave him a look that had the look of men who know what returning costs too often. I will try, he said. Try is a word a man may carry to the wall without shame. Ned watched him go and did not call after him. He had learned that lesson in a hot room far to the south. She had said, "Promise me." He had promised. He broke his heart on the promise every day he kept it. On a night in the spring following, when the snow had gone to slush and rain hammered the roofs as if trying to get in, Ned went again to the crypt. He took a lamp. He took a knife, though he did not intend to cut anything living. He lifted the stone and the coffer and he opened it. He laid the letters out upon the stone like bones for a casting. He set the ring beside them. It winked once in the lamplight and then went dull. He read Rhaegar's hand, and the words were as they had been the last time he had read them. He read the signatures and saw Arthur Dayne's clean stroke and heard, absurdly, the sound of a sword sliding home, and felt absurdly gratitude. He read the last letter again. If I fall, the thing we made must live and be hidden. Bend only to keep him breathing. I have bent as far as a man can, Ned said to the dead man's hand. And he breathes. He will breathe where you never thought to breathe. He set the letters back into the coffer and closed it and set the ring upon it and then set the stone again. He did it slowly, with care. He did not know whether he did it for himself or for the dead or for the gods. He did it because the world is so, and the doing of a thing is sometimes all a man has against it. When he went back up, the storm had eased. The clouds were pale rather than black and broke in places, and through one gap a cold set of stars looked down. In the yard a girl swung a stick at a post and cursed and swung again, her hair damp with rain and her eyes narrowed. In the kitchen Sansa sang under her breath, a song about ladies and lords who danced under lamps. In the hall, men set cards upon a board and argued about coins. In the tower above the godswood, Catelyn knelt with her hands around a candle and prayed to a god who listened with ears as new as the wax she burned. Ned climbed the stairs to the Lord Solar. He sat. He put his hands on the table and looked at them. They were clean. They would be dirty again in an hour or a day. It does not matter, he thought, and for a moment his mind was quiet. There was work to do. There is always work to do in a long winter or a short summer. A man keeps his word with his hands. He keeps it with his silence. He keeps it with his breath. He had done all three for many years. He would do them until he could not. Far to the south, a eunuch whose heart had more rooms than his house made a new plan. A lion sharpened his smile with the flat of his tongue. A queen looked into a mirror and saw herself twice, and in both reflections she was beautiful and afraid. Past the sea, a girl with silver hair stood in a house with a red door and dreamed of storms, and a man with a pointed beard counted ships. In the north, snow fell, under the earth, under stone, under names that men kept till they died and forgot after, letters slept and waited. They had done their work. They had made a winter man bend. In time, men would call the bending a crime or a grace, depending on whether they thought the fruit of it sweet. The world does not keep books that balance. Niet stark ruus. He lifted his cloak and set it upon his shoulders. He did not look back toward the stairs that went down, or toward the south where heat gathered behind the long curve of the world like breath drawn before a shout. He went forward. There was a boy to keep and boys to make into men and a house to keep through winter. There were letters he would never send and letters he would send with words carefully measured. There were lies he would tell because they were the only kind of truth that did not kill. He had promised. He would not break. He did not bend for kings. He bent only to keep him breathing.